Appreciate that. And Harrison, out of respect for everybody's time here, we're going to go ahead and get started. We appreciate, for those of you who are able to make it, appreciate you being here and want to welcome you to this space. As we, uh, as you know, we've had a number of conversations with our network with respect to the notion of there being a crime bill, and that we are starting to make certain investments in our empathy network, so that we are armed with the tools we need to have conversations with our members of Congress. Always get going and forget to introduce myself, Harrison. But my name is Candia Milton. I'm the Government Affairs Director here at dream.org. This conversation or this training is or workshop is about um, really uh, giving you the skill sets to engage your member of Congress, whether it be in district or in Washington, D.C. Let's talk about a few objectives to sort of level set us here. What do we want you to walk away with? We want you to walk away with a clear understanding of the threats and opportunities, um, uh, to, as we seek to make progress in 2026 relative to criminal legal reforms. And we often say criminal legal reforms. We want to ground ourselves in advancing public safety in that space, and so we always want to talk about it in that context. Hence, serious about safety. Majority is the campaign that we've undertaken. Number two, we want everyone joining to commit to visiting with their elected officials, but also being prepared with the fundamentals of what it takes to advocate and have conversations in an engaging and engaged way with public officials, elected officials, and their staff members. Um, and I think, at the end of the day, I always talk about a meeting. Many of you who've been in conversations or in meetings with me, um, always say as we engage in this process, be prepared to do something on the back end. The way I put it is, the purpose of this meeting is to get you to do something that you would not have done but for the fact that you attended this meeting. And so that is I was talking to Harrison the other day. I mentioned to him, my wife says, you're on that screen all the time in meetings. She says, you need to start getting into some doings. And so this meeting is about propelling us to getting into some doings. And so let's go next slide. Yeah, so just to give you a quick sort of readout on our agenda, we're gonna go into a quick breakout rooms, just get a sense of what brought you here and an opportunity to get to know your peers. We're going to give you a campaign overview, which is serious about safety majority campaign, and we'll be brief there. We'll review the policies platform. In other words, the affirmative policy agenda that we want to advance. We want to be on offense, so we want to permit a policy agenda that is perspective as opposed to simply fighting and being on defense. And then we're going to take you through the training from preparation to follow up. And then we're going to have a practice exercise that will be led by none other than Josh, so where you practice with your peers. And then we're going to close it out. 6:30 is the time zone that I'm in here in Washington, D.C. It might be 3:30 if you're on the West Coast. We're going to get you out of here within an hour and a half. Okay.
All right, I guess that's my turn. Hi, everybody. I'm Tori Soriano. I'm the senior organizing manager here. I'm sure you guys have either seen me or maybe you heard me give you phone calls yesterday. I don't know. But glad to be here. Always working to help you guys get connected to our work. And we're going to just start off with a quick breakout activity just to get to know each other, kind of start the conversation of what this training is all about. And so we're going to go into small groups and you're going to just talk first introduce yourself, your name, where you're tuning in from, and why you're here today. And then you're going to take turns answering the prompt, which is, have you ever met with someone who represents you in your government and to ask them for their support on an issue? If you haven't, talk about your fears or what your experiences or what you've heard from people. If you have, please let the folks in the know room how that was. Were you nervous? How did it go? What was the outcome? So that we could start preparing the folks who haven't done it before and sharing your wisdom and advice if you have done it before. So these are going to be three or four people per room. And it's only going to be about 5 minutes. So just make sure that everyone gets a turn to share. All
Wonderful.
right.
And the instructions are in the chat if you need them handy. And I'm going to send y'all in 3, 2, 1. See you back here in 5.
Hey, everybody. Looks like folks are trickling back in. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right. If I can just get two or three brave souls who want to talk about what they shared in the room and talk about, um, their own experiences with lobbying or not. Oh, look, we got some volunteers already. I think I saw Eric's hand go first. Go ahead.
So we talked about, stuff that we had already done to try and get with our legislators. I've actually personally met with mine. One of the other people in said she hadn't, but that she had done organizing for as far as like trying to get messaging out to them. And then I think that everybody seemed mostly comfortable with doing it. And then one of the big things we talked about was just being prepared, make sure you have lots of stuff, because it can be, you never know what they're going to ask you or ask of you.
All right. Good advice. Good advice. Thank you, Eric. All right. We got on Robert next.
Okay, so what we talked about in the room I was in, and has those of you who know me know I probably did most of the talking, was the fact that when you go to meet with somebody, you have to, before you meet with them, go to their website. If you can go to their social media, go to their social media. Know something about the elected official that you're going to talk about, their likes, dislikes. If you're a constituency, let them know you're a constituent. You have to let them know that how much you care before they care. So they want to know how much you care before they care about how much you know. And then the other part was that when you talk to these people, make sure that you connect your commonality to their goal. In other words, most of these people have constituents, they have voters that they want to serve. What does what you're asking for do to their voters, and how does it affect them? Because the bottom line for most of these politicians is votes. That's what brings in campaign funding. That's what does everything for them. So how is this going to affect their voters and their constituents? Think about that and you're winning.
Very nice, Robert. I think Candia might get a run for his money in running this workshop.
Yeah.
I'll send it back to you.
Yes, spoken like a guy who has done this before, right? Um, so I started to talk about the prongs of the campaign, and you heard me mention serious about safety majority. Um, and I want to make the connection before we talk about those prongs because many of you have been part of our engagement where you've heard us talk about the crime bill and the notion of there being a crime bill and we're not certain that there's going to be one, but we know that there's a great deal of language that speaks to tough on crime. We know that there's a lot of language or a few bills out there that are regressive in nature and speak to being tough on crime. But what we've done with the campaign is we pivoted to a place to advance what we refer to as an affirmative agenda, um, and under the banner of serious about safety majority. And so you may not hear us talk about crime bill per se, unless there's actually one. But what you will hear is the terminology or the name of the campaign and its entity, Serious About Safety Majority. And so the four prongs of the Serious About Safety Majority is communication, where we will engage earned and paid media opportunities to push out and advance our narrative with respect to crime and solutions to crime. And I will state, if you were here at our last meeting, you know that we were looking for people who were interested in sharing their stories and being the mouthpiece for the campaign. You were credible messengers as people who are directly impacted. And if there's still some interest there, please talk with um, Harrison. Reach out to Harrison or Tori on that. And then the other piece is, you know, that we are approaching an election cycle, and the issue of crime is always front and center in an election cycle, and so we're going to make certain that we are that our message is out there with respect to safety and being serious about safety, and we want to proffer that message, not be responsive to others' message. Then the other thing is organize coalition and identify allies who are in partnership with us to advance, you know, our affirmative agenda, but also use the language in conversation around how we proffer solutions to the challenges we see in our communities relative to crime. And then the fourth prong is, you know, what we're here for, and that is an aggressive legislative strategy around bills that we know that will advance public safety in our communities. And so those are the four prongs of the Serious About Safety Majority campaign. And again, we're going to be focused on the legislative side today, but we ask that you go, if you're interested, reach out to Harrison if you want to be one of the credible messengers. But what does that slate of bills look like? You're familiar with many of them as we've talked about them in the past, which is the Clean Slate Act, which is a federal bill, removing barriers for people who are returning to community. That is automatic and automated record sealing for certain crimes. Due process continuity of care for those who are in pretrial stages are able to access health care. So, as we know, they should not be denied that. They're not proven guilty. And so, access to health care. Restore Act, which protects food assistance for, or restores food assistance for individuals with um, drug convictions. The Fair Future Act does the same thing for housing, restores housing rights for people with drug conviction. The Reentry Act um, would allow for someone who's 30 days out from prison to apply for Medicaid coverage, so that when they hit the door, when our people hit the door, they have health care coverage. And then many of you, yeah, I'm certain you've heard of our efforts to rescind funding for Letcher Prison, which is a proposed prison to be built on top of a former coal mine in eastern Kentucky. Uh, Interestingly enough, President Trump put in a $350 million proposal to rescind the funds for the prison. And so what we need is your active engagement with your legislators to approve. Here we go. Interesting, right? Approve President Trump's proposal to rescind the money for the prison. So that is the legislative platform that we are as putting forth as our affirmative agenda. And so we need you in that effort to advocate, and as we seek to influence Congress to move that agenda. Now we're going to get into the meat of the training. Man, I need a drink of water here. I've been talking for a while here. Let's get into the meeting of the training. And so for those, we're going to really break it down to the fun to a very fundamental standpoint. And so when we talk about lobbying, what is it, right? What we want to do is one, communicate our legislative priorities. Um, that's the bottom line. And so there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll talk about that, everything from storytelling. But at the end of the day, we want to make an impact on the process. We're not just there to information dump. We want to move the process, and that's what lobbying is. It's moving and having an impact on the process. Next slide. And at the end of the day, when you are lobbying, it's really a test of the power you've built in that moment. It is the answer to the question of why should they listen to you. You're finding out whether or not you built enough power for to command them to listen to you. I mean, at the end of the day, you are the constituent, uh, and you inherently have power as a constituent. But how you use that power, this is an indication of really your flex of that muscle. Next slide. And so, there are some advocacy truths, and those of you who have taken this training before, you're familiar with these, but we're going to focus. I want you to take a look at this slide. And we say accept them as truths, but I really want your reaction to number two first, and then number five. Um, Government is in the business of picking winners and losers. How does that statement land with you all as you reflect on it? Take 30 seconds to reflect, and then if you want to volunteer, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm gonna volunteer you. Go ahead, Dina. I see you come off mute.
Um, yeah, it happens all the time. And ideally, there wouldn't be losers, I think. Everybody should be a winner and all the boats should be lifted. But that's not how our system is set up.
Mm-hmm.
The rich tend to win, and working people tend to lose in a lot of cases.
All right. One more reaction there.
When I think about the winners and losers, when I was trying to get someone to vote, I was doing a little research, and they said that the elected officials are only concerned about the desires of those who vote for them. If you're not voting for them, they don't care what you're concerned about. So it's like, if I'm a win, it's the people that support me that I'm a win with. For everybody else who, don't care to cast their vote and their concerns, they've already accepted the loser mentality. So it's like the elected officials not rocking with you.
Right. All right. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's more that I can add to both of those explanations. There's limited time, limited resources, and so they're deciding who gets that time and who gets those resources, right? Um, and so they're making those choices, and so I think that the author of that statement sort of subscribes to that notion. Let's go to the next one that has a star by it. Relationships are paramount. Get to know your politicians.
I'd like to respond to that.
All right.
I actually believe that relationships are the most important thing you can have in getting to know your politician. The better the relationship is, the better a chance that you're going to have that person's ear, that they're going to give some serious consideration to what you say, that they're going to allow you to present to them. And so building a relationship, not just with the politician, but with their office is of the utmost importance.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, don't need to say more. It's easy to say no, to the name on the page. It's easy. It's tougher to say no to somebody you have a relationship with. Let's go next slide. It's my favorite time to hand it over to one of my favorite people. Josh, go ahead and step in with that
Yes.
walk alert.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Josh Ho. I'm the Senior Policy Manager here at dream.org. I live in Lansing, Michigan. I'm formerly incarcerated, and I've been doing this for quite a while now. Also, I'm apparently the person who puts the wonk in Wonk Alert. So today I'll be talking to you about kind of the most exciting part, I'm sure, of the presentation, which is really kind of insider tricks on how bills become law. So probably not super exciting, but hopefully a little bit surprise. Hopefully it'll be entertaining to some extent. But before we dive in, if a couple people could say something, when you hear lobbying, what do you think? Just a couple people, like two people. I can't see, so if someone just wants to come off the mic, go ahead.
Lobbying your, you're going to your official, essentially trying to take an idea or a law or something that you want to get done, and you're trying to get them to go along with it.
Yeah, that's not that's pretty accurate. Someone else, what do you think when you think of lobbying? Not just the act itself, but what does it make you think of? What is kind of your perception of the whole business of lobbying or of lobbyists?
Somebody that gets paid to influence legislators, whether they care about an issue or not. They're working for somebody and they're um, uh, tending to their agenda.
Yeah, so I mean, both of those have a lot of elements in truth, both of y'all who spoke. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that, really anyone who's going in and trying to influence legislators to move legislation or to get things done that you want done is technically lobbying. You don't have to, I mean, it's definitely better when you get paid for it, that's for sure. And there certainly are rules around when lobbyists have to register and stuff like that. But the process you're learning today is part of the learning about lobbying. So, hopefully at the end of this, you'll feel like you're a seasoned pro. All right, next slide. All right, so the most important things we kind of need to do when you're starting the process of moving legislation is that you have to be very thoughtful, very strategic, and very intentional. From a structural standpoint, there are two chambers that you're usually working in, usually called the Senate and the House. Some states call them wacky other things. Legislation has to get introduced. It has to get assigned to a committee of jurisdiction. It has to get marked up by that committee or the committees of jurisdiction. You have to get a favorable vote out of committee. It has to be introduced on the floor, and you have to get a favorable vote on the floor. And then you have to have all that happen again on the other side. So there's lots of parts, and there's lots of things you have to think about when you're coming up with legislative strategy. It's not enough to just say, I have this great idea for a bill, and I want it to move in the legislature. You have to think through all the different parts, why it'll appeal to those people, how you're going to appeal to those people, and think through all the different parts, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. So another question real quick for everybody. Let's say you have a bill and it's gone through all those steps in both the Senate and the House in your state or at the federal level. Is the bill done then when it passes, when both houses have passed it? Does that mean your bill is passed? Is it done? Or is there something else you have to do? Anyone can take a guess. There's no wrong answers. Oh, there are wrong answers, but I won't be mean about it.
Doesn't the governor have to sign it?
Yes, that'd be the one that was missing from there. Yeah, you also have to think about the governor. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. In fact, everything on here we'll talk about in more depth in a second, but these are things that you should think about, that there are two chambers. Where are you starting? Why are you starting? What's the committee of jurisdiction? Who's the chair of the committee of jurisdiction? Who would be the best lead sponsor on the bill? We can't, as people out here, we can't introduce legislation by ourselves. Someone who's in the legislature has to introduce the legislation, and picking who that is a big part of figuring out if your bill's going to move forward or not. And then, bipartisanship, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few seconds, but that is a lot of times really important to passing legislation, because if there's a narrow margin of votes in either on the committee or on the floor or whatever, then you probably are not going to get 100% of any party. You're going to have some people on the other side who help out. All right, next slide. All right, so the process. Part of what we do is try to influence the process of government in what we do. So step one is that the bill is introduced by a lead sponsor in the House and or Senate through a committee of jurisdiction, and then assigned to a committee of jurisdiction. Does anyone know who, in most legislators, who assigns a bill to a committee? All right, well, usually it's the person who, it comes out of either the Speaker of the Senate's office or the leader of the Speaker of the House's office or the leader of the Senate's office. Most of the time, they're the ones who move it forward and assign bills. So after you've gotten your bill out and it's been assigned to a committee of jurisdiction, there'll be a committee hearing. The chairman will schedule a markup of that committee. And next slide.
Josh.
Yeah.
Yeah. If some may have the question, if I have a bill that's clearly criminal justice related, does that necessarily go through judiciary, or how
Well, I'll tell you a little quick story here, that it is usually the case that criminal justice bills will get assigned to criminal justice committees, but there are times when, particularly when a leader of the Senate or the Speaker of the House don't want a bill to move forward, that they'll put it in some other committee that's not the usual committee that it'll go to. And sometimes in most states and sometimes at the federal government, there are committees that are called the committee. They're not literally called this, but anyone who works around there will call them the committee where legislation goes to die. And so sometimes if the person who is who's introducing the legislation, and there isn't a lot of favor for it in the office of the leader or the office of the speaker, then there's a real good chance it could get assigned to a garbage committee and is never going to see the light of day, which is part of the reason. We'll talk more about strategy in just a second, but that's part of the reason you have to really have thought through all the different levers we're going to talk about and have a strategy for all of them. After the final mark out, it gets sent to the floor. And then if they're feeling good about your bill, then they'll bring it up for a floor vote. Then it would theoretically pass, and you have to redo it in the other session. Okay, now the next slide. All right, so what we're going to try to go through here is some ideas of how I think sometimes people don't have the deepest, idea of all the different levers that you have to maximize when you're thinking through legislative strategy. So I'm going to kind of talk through the things you have to think about in advance that can often get you in trouble. The first one is, do you have a committed sponsor? One of the real problems with having an uncommitted sponsor, and I'm sure a bunch of people in the room have had this happen before, where you have a sponsor and you find out through the process that that sponsor really only introduced your legislation so that they could run on it later. And what that means is that they're doing things that they think they're introducing things, not passing things. They're introducing things so that when the next election cycle comes down, they can go talk to their constituents and say, "Hey, look at these great bills that I put out, none of which passed, but it's like virtue signaling." And so you don't want that kind of sponsor. You want a sponsor that'll work with you to whip up support, to find bipartisan agreement, who will testify on the bill, for the bill in committee, and who can also help you move through committees and get on the side with the leader or the speaker as you're trying to move legislation. An uncommitted sponsor is not a death sentence. I think I put it was 80% of but it'll make your work much harder if there's not someone on the inside working to help you get your bill to move forward. And that's the whole point of getting a sponsor. Now, the next one is sponsor from the wrong party. As much as, it probably is hard to work both sides of the aisle and can be contentious considering all the bad things that happen in legislatures. Fortunately or unfortunately, in most cases, there are times when there are super majorities. but usually you're going to have a sponsor, probably a lead sponsor from the party who's the majority in that chamber. So if you have a majority GOP Senate and a majority Democrat House, you're going to have a GOP lead in the Senate and a Democrat lead in the House, uh, because that's how you're going to get your bill to move in those areas. And you have to have, hopefully those two people are on the same, have the same goals for the bill and for moving it, and it does that way. But really, you're going to have a real hard time if you have, for instance, a Republican House, we'll say, and you've introduced a bill, and your lead sponsor is a Democrat. It makes it harder to get that bill to move forward. You could also have Republican co-sponsors, but I'd usually want to have whatever the majority is in that chamber. I want to make sure my sponsor is from that party, and at least in good enough standing that that's going to make a difference in that party. The third one is lack of bipartisan support. We've talked about that a little bit, but regardless of anything else, the tighter the margins are that you're facing in either house or either chamber, the more you're going to need bipartisan support. The wider the margins are, the more you'll need heavy support from the majority party. And so there's kind of like two ways you have to look at it. If you've got a supermajority in both houses, you definitely want to sponsor from that supermajority in both houses. If you have tight margins in both houses, you're going to have bipartisan support in both houses. If there's one that's wide and one's that's short, that'll change your strategy, which is why I say you have to be really intentional and you have to think a lot about how these things work out. All right, I think next slide.
And Josh, as we
Yeah.
transition to the next slide, I can give folks a real-time example of what's going on right now in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor, a Democratic House, and a Republican Senate. And what the Republican Senate has said, if it doesn't come out of the Senate, out of the House in a bipartisan fashion, then they're not going to take up the issue at all. So you have to know the dynamics of the legislature and be strategic, much of what Josh is talking about.
All right. Well, the next one is if you have a lack of support from the leader or speaker. As I said before, if you don't at least have them to neutral, where they're not against the bill, they're just not necessarily for it, it's going to find a very hard time getting a vote or getting introduced or getting put in committee. I mean, it'll get introduced, but it won't find it, or sent to the right committee. There's really one of the unfortunate things about doing this kind of work is that there are certain people in the legislature whose vote just counts more than others. You could have 40 people wanting your bill to pass, and if who are in the body, and if the leader doesn't want it to move, it's not going to move because that's ultimately the leader's choice. So you really have to have an idea of where the leadership stands on your bill in both chambers. Okay, the next one is lack of support from the committee chair, and that's very similar to this leader and speaker. Just like what we just talked about, where those people, the leader and the speaker, control the entire legislative body, the committee chair controls their committee. And so a lot of bills can be assigned to committee. That doesn't mean that they'll get a markup or move in that committee. They're just in a pile of bills. The person who makes that decision is the chair of the committee. And so if the chair of the committee doesn't want your bill to move, even though it was assigned there, they're not going to bring it up. They're not going to bring it up for markup. And that's, another thing another layer you have to think of strategy as you're going through it. The next one is lack of support from the committee, lack of committee support from the majority party. And this gets a little bit confusing. Hopefully not too bad. Basically, you can get a favorable vote out of committee, but not have a majority of the people of the majority party vote yes. If you get a bill out of committee and it goes to the floor and it doesn't have the support of a majority of the people from the majority party on it, that is a signal to the people in that caucus, the people who move together, that this bill we're not going to support this bill probably. I always think it's very important to have the support from a majority of the people in the committee from the majority party. And we do a lot of work to make sure that happens when we are actually trying to pass legislation in our states and also at the federal level. Next slide. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. The other thing that can really derail you is lack of support from the governor. There's some states where it's not as bad as others, but in a lot of states and at the federal level, if the president or the governor vetoes a piece of legislation, you're probably going to need to pass it again with a 2/3 majority in both chambers, which is not easy because you probably didn't have to get a 2/3 majority to pass it in the first place. So it's very important to know where the governor stands, and talking to the governor's staff early and often as your bill's going through the process and making sure they're aware of the changes and things like that is important too. And obviously, when you're just starting out, you're not going to have those relationships set up, but over time you'll get them. The more you go to offices, the more you're around, the more you talk to people, the more people you'll meet. You just have to spend time at the Capitol and start meeting people. And, as Candia was talking about in his portion, politics in a lot of ways is a relationship business. You really, one of your real goals should be trying to build relationships. All right, next slide. Now, I'm not going to talk about this because we just went over this, but I think Harrison's probably going to send out the slides to all of you. And I put this in here so you'd have kind of a checklist of things that you need to think about strategy for as you kind of move toward doing your own lobbying, or you're part of a campaign or whatever it is, or you're starting a campaign. You need to at least have thought out how you're going to make sure that all of these things happen. You have to have a theory of the case. You have to put together a strategy to make sure, for instance, you have a determined sponsor from the majority party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, as a little bonus at the end here, since I didn't talk about it in the other things, I did add some other things that I usually try to do. And I've worked on, I think, well over 40 pieces of legislation in my time doing this. And I almost always try to do this. I mean, I'm doing this in Wisconsin right now because they're out of season and we're trying to pass some supervision legislation. So I'm taking that time to try to meet with the Department of Corrections, the Prosecutors Association, the Correctional Officers Union, victims' rights groups, and see where they are on our bills so that there's no surprises for me as we move on the legislative calendar. And I know who's for us and who's against us and which arguments we're going to have to be ready for. But the goal always when you're having this meeting is to get them on board with your bill, or at least get them to neutral, because the worst thing that can happen to you on a criminal justice bill a lot of times is if the prosecutors show up and say it's a bad idea and we don't want it, or the Department of Corrections shows up and say we can't have this. That's going to cause you a lot of problems. Now, another group you can think about talking to is also the Sheriff's Association. They sometimes often will show up on these bills, but they're a lot harder to move to neutral. They generally oppose most everything, but at least, having the conversation is a good idea. Next slide. All right, the next thing is never underestimate the opportunities in the executive branch. There are kind of a lot of things you can get done without even implementing legislation. For instance, just recently in Wisconsin, the governor just did a huge commutation action and put out a new commutation board, and it's trying to get a whole bunch of people out before he gets termed out of office. If you're working with the governor or you have relationships in that office, there are a lot of things that can be done administratively. I was involved in a state campaign several years ago to try to get COVID vaccines into Michigan prisons. We worked very hard with the governor's office to try to make that happen. Didn't require legislation. It just required the governor saying, yes, that can happen. And ultimately it did, which, I believe saved quite a few lives. There's also just a lot of, they have a lot of different areas where they're budgeted to do things, and your thing might fit into their administrative, into what they already have money for. And so trying to find ways to, find something that already exists, like all of us have worked with probably at some level, a Department of Corrections. They have a huge budget and there are 100,000 things they're trying to do with it. A lot of times, if you can get simpatico with them, if you get on the same page with them, you might be able to do some good just working with the governor's office and the Department of Corrections. You might be able to get some changes made without legislation. Brief example of, several years ago, I worked with the Department of Corrections and with the governor's office to make sure in the budgets that they were giving relief to folks for phone fees. And I think in 2 years, we got them reduced, me and a group of other people got them reduced by 70%. So, sometimes even if the the legislature is tough, you can kind of try to think of ways to get the same thing done through the executive branch. And one more example of that, I remember just about 2 years ago, Janos Martin, who's our chief idea officer here at Dream, coming up with an idea for having President Biden commute all the people on CARES Act home confinement. We were also working on it legislatively, keeping those folks home. But ultimately, the legislation didn't move, and President Biden did actually commute most all of the people who were on CARES Act home confinement. There were other people who worked on it too, but I remember explicitly having that conversation with Janos over a year before those commutations happened. So, there's a lot of things you can get done in the executive branch. Next slide, please. All right. So if you haven't done this before, the most important thing in trying to get legislative meetings is to start in advance. You don't try to get them off the cuff. You usually want to start about 4 weeks out. And you want to, you can use, you can send emails, you can call, you can even send snail mail. They still receive that stuff, but it's a lot easier if you're doing it on the phone to make sure that you get on the calendar. Sometimes if you get the person in their office who does, either constituency relations or is their chief scheduler, you might be able to get it done through email, but it's a little more complicated. I tend to always call or go by. I live pretty close to the Capitol, so when I can, I go by and try to make because that way it gives me an opportunity to have a continued relationship with the staffers in the articles in the offices that I'm trying to meet. Um, if you're not getting a response, just keep following up. This is not one of those things where, if you're calling an office or you want to go to an office, most of the time if you're doing it, you're a constituent of that office. Most often, they're only going to take appointments with people who are from their district. So if you're on a campaign, the way you'd spread it up is make sure that all the people in the campaign are assigned to the people that are their representatives or senators. And then, over time, you're going to want to know and have a relationship with people in that particular office. And another thing I always suggest is to never be afraid to walk the halls. Walking the halls is like one of the best ways to meet people and to go into offices and talk to folks. I don't have an appointment, but I just wanted to come in and say hi. I work at blah, blah, blah. I'd love to talk to who's your criminal justice person, and they'll give you a card or whatever. And then you can start emailing that person and having conversations, and those relationships can really grow over time. There are some people at the federal level who I drop emails on a semi-regular basis just to see if they want to have a talk anytime I'm in town, and usually they say yes. When I'm in Michigan, I run into folks all the time that I've known for years. And so, as said before, politics is a relationship business. Taking the time to do all the work you need to do to get the appointments you need to get is probably the best path for that. I think this is where I turn it over to Candia.
Yeah. So you've strategized with respect to how your bill will be introduced. You've gotten it to the right committee, um, and you've put out the request for meetings and got responses. Folks are ready to meet with you, and so now it's time for us to prepare for the meeting. And so, what does that preparation look like? I always say, uh, channel your inner Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, Viola Davis. What do I mean by that? Those three are really known for preparing for a role, preparing for the opportunity that's in front of them. And so we want you to be entrenched in the preparation, process. That is one, getting to know the individual you're going to meet with. And we say congressperson or representative or senator. But, at the end of the day, too, if you know you're meeting with a staff member, go to LinkedIn and identify that staff member and get to know that person as well. But as you're seeking to get to know them, what you're looking for are areas to build relationship and find common ground. Because as Robert said earlier, you want to make certain that as you're having conversations, you're understanding what their self-interest is, and making your proposal or what you're asking them to do consistent with that self-interest. And so that's really what they're motivated by. And so, as you're doing that research, you want to make sure that you're connecting, because as we talked about before, Beth, relationships are paramount. They're important, and central to a relationship building is making that connection. But here's where you cut off at the Viola Davis, Denzel Washington comparisons. You want to be genuinely who you are in that space. You don't want to act when you get in that space. You want to be you. Next slide. Um, and so as you go in, you want to make certain that let's say we're going in groups, right? We want to make certain that we're intentional in that space. You identify before you go into that meeting, in preparation for that meeting, you want to identify the leader. Who's going to be the person that sets up the conversation? You want to identify the storyteller. No matter how many people are in that meeting, know that this storyteller is the most important person in the room. Why? Because they are the constituent. And so if you're not the constituent, as the leader, you want to make certain that the constituent, voice is on the forefront of the conversation. And so you have to make certain that everyone is leaving room for the maximization of the constituent's voice. And then you want to have someone in there who's taking notes. And so identify that on all these roles on the front end before you even go into a meeting. But now, as you walk into any office, you want to make certain that you're greeting everyone. Uh, you always use this. Everyone is important. From the intern who might be answering the phones up front, to the chief of staff, to the LD, or should I say, legislative director, all the way up to the member. Everyone in that office is important. Um, so often the intern is the family member of a prominent business person. So you never know who you're going to run into in those offices. So it's important as you go into those offices to treat everybody with respect. Now, when you sit down, it's important to express gratitude to the congressperson or the staff member. Um, thank you for taking the meeting. And then everyone, certainly it's important to introduce yourselves in that meeting, so they know who's in the room and who's the constituent. And so if you're the constituent, you introduce yourself as such. And then the leader of the meeting will lay out the agenda for the meeting and make it clear what you're here to talk about, right? And again, that all should be practiced on the front end in preparation for the meeting. And then telling stories. So often we talk about stories and we sort of leave that on the table, right? But the story should really be lifting up the data and be relevant. So again, it's just not the dropping of a story and it has no relationship to to what you're there for. But that story connect in a way that is related to what the policy you're seeking to advance, but also should be humanizing the data, lifting the numbers off the page, and making it real. And so, Josh, I think you're going to do a little piece on storytelling a little bit later. Um, and so we'll get into that a little bit, but for those of you who have applied for our cohort program, know that this is we really do a deep dive into storytelling. And then you want to make the case. which will crescendo into an ask. As I mentioned, the purpose of any meeting is to get someone to do something they would not have done but for the fact that they attended that meeting. That applies here. And so you want to make certain that you have a very direct, poignant ask either to the member of Congress or to their staff member. Now, well, what does that ask look like when it comes to the member of, or should I say, a staff member? Well, real simple. Staff member, let's say Kelly, um, do you feel comfortable recommending to your boss co-sponsorship, right? And so it could be as simple as that. Do you feel comfortable recommending that they vote for it when their name is called in committee or called on the floor? So you can, that's the ask to the staff member. And then you want to thank the congressperson or the staff member for their time. And I will state this at the conclusion, get you a good picture. They often say that the meeting didn't happen if you haven't taken a picture. I because I'm not good at this part, I always say no, the meeting happened. I just got to get better at taking pictures. But do take pictures because and to the extent that you are on social media, uh, get permission to put it out there, but then put it out there because they love it when you state their name in public. And so don't be afraid to do a social media post on the issue as well. Next slide. Yeah, and before we get into questions too, I want to say this when it comes to meeting with staff versus a member of Congress. Um, I'm going to say don't be discouraged if you're meeting with a staff member. I've seen scenarios, and I go back to 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 the ask. Um, we we had a meeting with a staff member, and in fact, most of our meetings have been with staff members, and all of the co-sponsorships that we've been able to garner were meetings with staff members. Um, and I remember asking the question, do you feel comfortable going back and recommending co-sponsorship? And we had three justice impacted individuals who shared their story in that meeting. And the staff member said, I've been going back and forth on whether or not I was going to recommend co-sponsorship. But after hearing these gentlemen's story, I do feel comfortable recommending co-sponsorship. And so I say that to say, don't be discouraged if you have a staff member that you're talking with, because they are often writing the recommendations to their member of Congress. And it's important, one, to understand what their roles are, but then and the power of it as well. One of the things I didn't mention too is at the conclusion, um, you know, make sure you open it up to them for questions that they may have. And to the extent that they have questions that you don't have the answer to, be okay with saying, I don't have the answer to that question, but let me get back to you with an answer. And then make certain that you follow back up in writing, and offer a thank you note after the meeting as well. Now we'll stand down for questions.
I think at least my thing is saying there are a couple in the Q&A. Is anyone reading that?
I got it, Tori. Kelly had more of a comment than a question, but I think it's valuable to uplift. They shared, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think there's some value there.
I think it's both what you know and who you know, but who you know matters a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm in agreement with that because the who you know gets you in there. But the what you know can actually close the door, right? Or close the deal, shall I say? Um, and so, yes, I'm in agreement. In fact,
Wonderful.
um, we had a leader. We were really searching for Republican co-sponsors for the Fair Future Act for more than a year, and then I had a conversation with our leader Yusuf Dahl. For those of you who know him, I drop his name. Um, maybe you should get your member of Congress, since he's a Republican and you see him and see him often. Maybe you should go wherever he is, and to get his co-sponsorship. And the he spent 2 months chasing Representative Ryan McKenzie down, and ultimately Ryan McKenzie is now the lead co-sponsor. Representative Ryan McKenzie is now the lead co-sponsor of the Fair Future Act, and we have a Republican on board. The power of relationship, constituency, and information, knowledge.
Gabby Hart had a question around how can we activate governor candidates to speak on criminal justice in a tough on crime state? I understand campaign strategy and needing to win, but how do you carefully ask these questions and not harm an otherwise good candidate? I want to normalize the conversation and not ostracize those who are on board with reform.
Since Candy has done more election stuff, I'll probably let him go first here.
So, what the first thing I would do to try to get to two sort of entities within the campaign: the policy entity as well as the comms entity, and maybe to the extent you can bring those both together, and one, educate them on the language to use. The and to the extent that you're able to educate them on the language, just like any other staffer, they take that language to their representative or to their governor and say, here's an effective way to talk about crime. Because let's say you're a Democrat, and you're trying to figure this thing out and going up against a Republican. If a Republican, and Josh, you can now dig in a little deeper than I will. If you're a Republican, you come in with tough on crime language, and as a Democrat, if you try to out tough on crime a Republican, the statistics say you lose. But if you come with solutions, a solutions-based response, and really proffer it with an attack on the front end, proactively come with that messaging, that solutions messaging will beat the tough on crime messaging. Josh, I know you've been an active participant in those um, working groups. You want to talk a little bit about the messaging part?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said a lot of the things that I would normally say. The only thing that I would also say is if you know that your opponents are going to come at you with tough on crime, you have to be ready and you have to start out saying why your legislation is going to make your area safer. Uh, if you blunt their best attack right off the bat, if you say this actually will reduce crime and you've done the research and you know why, I don't know what bill we're talking about here, but for most of the bills I've worked on, I can tell you the story for why it's, better. So if you're walking into an office and they're expecting you to talk about a bunch of stuff that's not public safety, and you start out saying, hey, this is really good for public safety, that can change their mindset. Uh, you have to find part of I think someone said this earlier in the chat, part of what you have to do is get to know the people that you're going to meet, talk to other people who've met with them, read up on them, get an idea of what they stand for and why they're into tough on crime or whatever it is. Or if it's like, I think what Gabby was asking was more of a question of, how can you find out where the governor, for instance, in a governor's race stands on these issues if they're running away from them because they think that's going to hurt their campaign? And if that is the case, you have to find but under the radar ways to find out what those candidates actually think on those issues. And you can do that by, again, knowing their staffers, knowing their, people who are working on their campaign, going to events in their district, in your district that they attend. There's lots of ways you can get the person to talk, or people in there to talk about where they stand on the issues, even if they're not making it a gigantic part of their campaign. Uh, you know, the other thing is they have a track record. I mean, I was just thinking about this earlier. There was a time when, there's many times where where there are people, actually, the current Republican who represents my district in the House right now, is someone who I used to lobby all the time. I'm sorry. That I used to lobby all the time. I don't have anything to drink, but I'm losing my voice here. Who then ended up going to the federal level. He's a, but he used to be a state legislator, and I used to lobby him all the time here in state. And so sometimes as people are moving up, they're hopefully, if you've been doing this work for a while, people, someone who's connected to them. And that's probably the best way to get an in, or at least have a discussion off the record where you're not trying to burn them or anything like that. You're just trying to feel out where they're at, or what they believe in, or what kind of governor they'll be in terms of the issues that we care about. I hope that made sense. Sorry about the coughing. So we're so committed to this stuff that both Candy and I are both sick today, but we're both
both here. I had when you see me go off cameras, because I'm putting the towel on my head so I can be prepared for my role here. But yeah, we're both. I think we caught it virtually from each other. I don't know.
Straight up.
Cyber virus.
Right.
All right. So now we're getting into next steps. I'll quickly breeze over this. But those of us, or those of y'all who are planning to join us for some of these legislative meetings, they will last between 15 to 25 minutes. I've been in meetings virtually that have gone on for like 8 minutes. It really varies. And they will take place between 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, between the dates of May 4th and 22nd. If you're unavailable during any blocks within this time frame, please let us know ASAP. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. That's the best way to connect with me, or if you're in our member Slack. And then bring a friend. We've got strength in numbers when we go and connect with those in power, and your elected officials, want to hear from them. So make sure to send those invites to your mom, your neighbor, congregation member, whoever it might be in your community, to bolster your case. And we're going to move into our last exercise, which I think we're going to have to shorten a little bit. But Josh, did you still want to share the example video, or do you want folks to just take a look at that on their own?
Well, I think if we just have a couple people in each group kind of talk through what their elevator pitch would be, it'll be fine. But I think it is a good idea for people who've never seen an elevator pitch to see the video, just because I think it'll help give you an idea. It's not obviously in a legal context, but it's still the same idea. You want to be able to talk to anybody and condense the bill, the pitch for the bill that you're trying to pass, in as short a period of 45 seconds or less usually. So that's what he does is a good example of a quick elevator pitch. So I think it's good to show that. And what we're talking about here is the reason we're doing this exercise is because everyone who ever does this kind of work, part of what they have to do is be able to explain legislation in a concise way. And if you're in a group of people going to lobby a legislator, the first person, the leader of the group, in that role, is going to start out by summarizing the bill and then introducing everyone, or introducing everyone and then summarizing the bill and then handing it over to the storyteller. So it's just a good skill to have if you haven't done much lobbying. So yeah, I would go ahead and show that if you can.
It was my second week of college, and I was out of shampoo. So I took an Uber to the nearest Walmart, and by the end of the day, that bottle of shampoo ended up costing me a little bit over $20 after you factor in the price of the Uber. I needed college supply. Imagine the Fruit of the Month Club, but at the beginning of every month, rather than fruit, you receive toiletries, things like shampoo or soap or deodorant. In a random anonymous sample of 14% of the people living in my hall at the University of Dayton, 42% of people surveyed said that they would purchase a subscription to College Supply if it existed, and just over 30% said that they would at least consider it, because it would increase time, decrease stress, and improve the overall health of every user. As a current freshman in college, I am the target demographic for College Supply, and I can tell you that it is much needed and an underserved market because it's college simplified. Thank you.
So yeah, the point of this is to go into breakout rooms and try to come up with a elevator pitch just so you get in the habit of it. I don't know. I think Harrison shared some information with you all about what we were discussing. Yes or no?
Yes. Let me share the exercise on the screen. The link is also in the chat, and there was a QR code up earlier. But the full instructions are right here. We've got a little bit less time than we were hoping for. But Josh, you want to give just like a really quick liner notes rundown of what our participants will be doing?
I just think the two people in the group should probably try to come up with an elevator pitch, give them in the group, and then see what other people say based on the legislation that we suggested.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, folks, I'm going to open up our rooms and I'll see you back here in just over 10 minutes.
Yeah, Ashley, you want to share a reflection? I see you anxious there. You're
Yeah, I can speak. We talked about I was just having some, I guess, putting into context what people are saying. So we're talking about how Dina's working right now about trying to get sentences removed for people who have crimes that they were sorry. But anyways, anyone who it relates to like sexual violence or domestic violence, and then trying to like frame it into the context when you're talking to a legislator, saying like this is important to me as a woman and this is important in like the safety of women going forward, and just trying to make it more personalized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And so I actually want to thank everybody for your participation, your input, not only in the breakout sessions, but really your participation, even if you simply listen and learned. And for those who contributed what they had, we appreciate you as well. And let me just thank you in advance because we're going to put you to work. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to get you to do something, Robert, you wouldn't have done, but for the fact that we twisted your arm and brought you to this meeting. And so we will be reaching out to each and every one of you to get a sense of what your availability is for a meeting within the, was it between the 4th and the
22nd.
All right, so between May 4th and the 22nd. And so we look to hear from you and also look to hear from us as well. But until such time, we bid you farewell and have a great evening. And we look forward to working with you.
All right, I'm going to prompt everybody to come off mute.
Or what about, did you want to mention our organizing training next week?
Yeah. So right before we all come off mute and say good night and good luck to one another, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug our next workshop as part of Serious About Safety Majority, which is going to be about organizing and engaging our family, friends, people at barbershops, farmers markets, everyday conversation, somebody stuck in the middle seat on a plane with you, what have you, about this work and trying to shift the narrative about crime and crime trends in a very like proactive way. We're building a block nationally, but also in our key priority states. to advance a serious about safety agenda and not a tough on crime one on the federal level, but very applicable material to the state and local level as well. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm helping lead that one. The link is in the chat, as I mentioned. Everybody's got a role to play in this movement. And if you can't make that one and you just think legislative advocacy is your bag, then, stay in that lane. We appreciate whatever you can contribute. But yeah, without further ado, unless my colleagues have anything else to add, would love for everybody to just,
as you jump off, please know that to the extent you're interested in legislative advocacy, the organizing and legislative advocacy go hand in hand. Building power and advocating, they go hand in hand. So as much as I am a government affairs guy, I enthusiastically and emphatically encourage you to participate in the organizing training next week.
Okay.
Absolutely. Candia will be in the halls of Congress. I'll be in the street. And it's all laddering up to the same objectives.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. I just had to say that. All right, everybody.
No. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you guys. Hope to see you next week.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
Have a great rest of your week.
Good night. Good night.
All right.